John Anderson was a man of routine. Since college, life had been predictable, especially after meeting Amy, a fellow student passionate about art. They quickly bonded over shared goals, though their paths diverged. John started a small printing shop in Elmville while Amy pursued her art. Despite different interests, their marriage seemed strong, and they supported each other as they built a life together. Their happiness peaked with the birth of their daughter, Amanda, who became their world. However, as time passed, subtle changes crept into their relationship. Conversations grew shorter, and the connection they once had began to fray. John noticed but was too busy to address it, until Amy's distant behavior became impossible to ignore in recent months. Sitting at his desk, John pondered what to do. His wife of 6 years had been acting differently since Christmas, seeming preoccupied and distant. Their once meaningful conversations had dwindled to brief exchanges, and Amy's repeated claim of nothing being wrong frustrated him. Determined, he planned to confront her again that night. The growing distance affected their Zek's life, once active but now reduced to almost nothing. Amy had been taking evening art classes for the past 5 months, and John noticed they were lasting longer. On other nights, she would work on her paintings for hours. While John cared for Amanda during these times, he began to wonder if something more was going on. Twice he checked up on Amy at the university, but found nothing suspicious. She was always where she said she'd be, working on her art. As John sat there, unsure how to fix something he couldn't even confirm was broken, his new assistant, Mary, approached him and said, "John, Amy's on the phone." Mary, a recent hire, had quickly proven her worth by efficiently managing customer service and administrative tasks, freeing John to focus on running the business. With the post-Christmas slowdown coming to an end, he appreciated her skills even more. John picked up the phone and greeted, "Hi, dear. Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine, John," Amy replied. "I just want to know if you'll be home at your usual time tonight." "Yes, I should be," John assured her. "Mary has things under control here." "Good," Amy said. "I need to talk to you. I'll see you at 5:15. Goodbye." "Goodbye. Love you," John replied, but she had already hung up. He stared at the phone, troubled by how quickly she'd ended the call. Just a few months ago, they would have chatted and teased each other over the phone. But now, she seemed distant. John picked up a photo on his desk from their vacation last year in Florida. They were on the beach, smiling with their arms around each other. He remembered how good their first 5 years of marriage had been, filled with trips and romance. Their once frequent lovemaking had dwindled, and he couldn't understand why. He hoped to get answers tonight. The ringing phone pulled John from his thoughts. He answered and returned to work, deciding to deal with his problems with Amy later. Just before closing time, Mary and Frank, his only other employee, entered his office. Mary informed him of a rush job that needed to be finished by morning, but John couldn't stay late. Frank reluctantly agreed to work overtime. John quickly packed up, eager to talk to Amy. He left the office and arrived home early. Entering the kitchen, he found Amy staring out the window. When he greeted her and tried to kiss her, she turned away and said, "Please, John, don't. I need to talk to you." Confused, John followed Amy into the living room. She sat down and, after a moment, said, "John, I'm leaving you. No, I'm divorcing you." Stunned, John asked, "What? How can you say that?" Amy explained that while taking her art course, she realized she had fallen in love with Peter, her professor. She felt they were better suited for each other, sharing more interests. Peter was leaving for Paris at the end of the semester, and she wanted to go with him as his wife. She needed the divorce finalized by then. "You're talking about Peter Bridges, your professor?" John asked in disbelief. Amy nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "Yes, John, I'm sorry. I never meant for this to happen, but it has." John sat in silence, his mind racing through the years he'd spent with Amy, the love they shared, and the future he had envisioned. He wanted to argue, plead, or make her see reason, but deep down, he knew nothing would change her mind. The woman he loved was gone, replaced by someone he barely recognized. Amy stood up slowly. "I'll have my lawyer send the papers on Monday. I'm leaving now. Amanda is with my parents, and they'll bring her home at 7. John wiped his eyes and followed her to the front hall. He watched as she picked up her suitcases and walked out the door. At the bottom of the stairs, Peter Bridges approached, took one of the suitcases, and gave John a smug look. Amy didn't look back as they drove away. John closed the door, tears falling as he sat back on the sofa, replaying the evening's events in his mind. Time slipped away until the doorbell rang. For a brief moment, he hoped it was Amy returning, but it was her father, Fred Holmes, who walked in. "I see she told you," Fred said, disappointed. "I can't believe she fell for that guy." Fred's wife, June, and their daughter, Barbara, followed, carrying Amanda and her things. The family's somber expressions showed they had been crying. Amanda, however, remained cheerful, unaware of the pain around her. John stood and they all hugged him, offering comfort. With no siblings and his parents gone, the Holmes family was all he had. They sat together, discussing what had happened. No one could believe it. Tears were shed again as they shared their disbelief. Around 7:30, June suggested finding something to eat, and she and Fred went to the kitchen to prepare sandwiches. Barbara handed Amanda to John, who let his daughter play in his lap, even as she tugged at his hair. Despite the sadness, Amanda's laughter brought a moment of relief. Soon they all gathered around the coffee table to eat. John wasn't hungry, but ate anyway, appreciating the company. As they ate, he observed the Holmes family, Fred and June, both retired and active, and Barbara, a 16-year-old with braces and a quiet smile. After the meal, Amanda entertained everyone by standing at the coffee table and trying to grab plates, her playful antics lifting their spirits. By 8:30, Barbara volunteered to get Amanda ready for bed, while John, Fred, and June discussed the logistics of balancing work and childcare. They decided John would need daycare, but June offered to help in the meantime. John planned to take the next day off to handle things. Barbara returned, reporting Amanda was asleep. John thanked her for her help. After more conversation, the Holmes family decided to leave. John expressed his gratitude and locked the door behind them. He checked on Amanda, who was sound asleep, then poured himself a stiff drink to calm his nerves. As he sipped his scotch, anger replaced his earlier sorrow. Amy had shattered his world, and he vowed not to make things easy for her. John went upstairs to the master bedroom and turned on the light. It was the first time he'd been there since Amy left, and he noticed the empty closet and bare makeup dresser. The attached bathroom was also devoid of her things. He turned off the light and collapsed on the bed, tears returning as he felt the emptiness inside. Amy was gone, and though he doubted he could win her back, he felt he had to try. Eventually, the scotch took effect, and he fell into a restless sleep, still dressed. He woke early, took a hot shower, and went through his morning routine, though the thought of living without Amy weighed heavily on him. After checking on Amanda, still asleep with her teddy bear, he kissed her cheek and went downstairs to prepare breakfast. He made coffee, found cereal for both himself and Amanda, and forced himself to eat despite having no appetite. His thoughts remained on Amy, but he knew he needed to focus. John brought out his briefcase and did some work at the kitchen table until he heard Amanda waking. After changing and dressing her, he fed her breakfast. When Amanda realized it was her father feeding her and not Amy, she began to cry, and John struggled to calm her. Eventually, he distracted her with a toy, and she settled down. He called the office and left a message for Mary to contact him. When she called back, he explained he'd be working from home for most of the day, but would stop by later. He didn't mention what had happened. Soon after, June arrived to care for Amanda while John finished his work. By 10 o'clock, he joined June and Amanda in the living room. June noticed John's exhaustion and commented on it. John admitted he'd slept poorly, aided only by scotch, but resolved to get through this for Amanda's sake. He even confessed he might take Amy back for Amanda's benefit, though he suspected Amy had already moved on. June hesitated before revealing that Amy had told her she'd been physically engaged with Peter over the last 2 weeks, which was why she distanced herself from John. However, she reassured John that Amy had said he was the more considerate lover, and her decision wasn't based on sexual dissatisfaction. John appreciated the clarification, but doubted Amy would change her mind. Deciding to distract himself with work, John headed to the office, determined not to let his business fail. He kissed Amanda, who proudly stood by the sofa, and waved goodbye, just as he had many times before. He reminded himself that his priority was ensuring Amanda came through this situation unscathed. At the office, Mary was busy on the phone, so John went straight to his desk, needing time to compose himself after the emotional drive. Once settled, he handed Mary the files he'd completed at home. Noticing her concerned look, he decided it was time to explain the situation to her. When Mary entered his office, John asked her to close the door and sit down. It was difficult for him, but he eventually said, "Mary, I'm dealing with a serious situation at home. My wife left me last night, but she didn't take our daughter. I've become a single parent. You've been here only 2 weeks, but you've shown great competence. I'd like to make you my office manager with a 1.50 raise for now. We can review how things are going in a month." Mary was surprised, but accepted the offer. She assured John she was up for the task, especially with the extra pay. John expressed his confidence in her abilities, explaining that he needed her help as he juggled work and caring for Amanda. Afterward, he shared the news with Frank, who offered his support. John worked until mid-afternoon before heading home with files to finish. He asked Mary to call him if any issues arose, assuring her that he trusted her decisions. At home, June told John that Amanda had fussed for her mother at lunch, but she eventually calmed down. John set up his den to work, realizing he needed better equipment for working from home. The afternoon passed quickly, and by 4:30 he wrapped up work. June, who had started dinner, mentioned she had a commitment over the weekend and suggested Barbara help with Amanda. John agreed, appreciating Barbara's help. After June left, John fed Amanda, who cried for her mother again, but he managed to distract her. The evening was quiet, and after Amanda's bath and bedtime, John poured a scotch and sat reflecting on Amy. It was midnight before he went to bed. On Monday, February 4th, John woke early and reflected on the weekend. Barbara had arrived on Saturday and took charge of caring for Amanda, allowing John to focus on upgrading his den into a functional office. By Sunday noon, his office setup was complete, and he spent the rest of the day with Amanda and Barbara at the park. Although Amanda had a few tantrums, Barbara managed to soothe her, keeping her occupied. June picked up Barbara on Sunday evening, promising to return Monday morning. She arrived at 8:30, and John headed to the office. The morning was busy until Mary brought in a courier envelope from a law firm. She handed it to John with a concerned look. John hesitated before opening it, finding papers reflecting the terms Amy had agreed to, including arrangements for her time with Amanda. John placed the papers in his briefcase, knowing he needed to contact his lawyer but lacking the energy. He already dreaded Wednesday, when he would see Amy again, fearing it would feel like losing her all over again. The rest of Monday and Tuesday flew by, but Wednesday morning, John woke up earlier than usual, wanting to leave as soon as Amy arrived. When the doorbell rang at 8:30, he braced himself. Amy was facing the street when he opened the door, so he simply said, "Come in. Amanda's still asleep. I'll be going now." He grabbed his briefcase from the kitchen and left through the side door, relieved to avoid a conversation with her, fearing he might break down. Wednesday felt like the longest day of John's life, with his thoughts consumed by Amy's presence at home. By the time he returned, the emotional pain had resurfaced. Twice, he nearly broke down in tears, wondering if he should consider counseling for depression. At 4:30, he called the house and told Amy, "I'll be home around 5 o'clock. Please leave by the front door when I come in through the side. I can't face you today." Amy agreed with a simple, "All right." When John got home, he heard Amy leaving through the front door as he entered through the side. He saw her drive away without looking back. Supper didn't go well. John couldn't eat, and Amanda, after finishing her meal, began crying for her mother. Nothing seemed to console her, and she cried so hard she struggled to catch her breath. John, deeply upset, finally calmed her down, gave her a bath, and put her to bed, staying with her until she fell asleep. That night, John repeated his ritual of a scotch and deep thinking, staying up until 1:30. He decided he had to act for both his and Amanda's sake. He would contact his lawyer. Thursday morning, John called his lawyer and scheduled an afternoon appointment. At 2 o'clock, he handed his lawyer, Bob Taylor, the papers from Amy's lawyer. After reviewing them, Bob noted that Amy's terms were unusually favorable, with no demands for personal or child support. John agreed, but insisted on changes. He wanted Amy to give up all parental rights, avoid any contact with Amanda or him, and sign a legally binding agreement to stay at least 500 feet away. He made it clear that if Amy didn't agree, he would fight the divorce. Bob was skeptical, but agreed to draft the letter, cautioning John that Amy might not accept these terms. John returned to work, feeling better now that his demands were in motion. He heard nothing more that week and decided to repeat the weekend arrangement with Barbara, which had gone well. Barbara agreed, and they spent another good weekend together. This time she brought homework, and John helped her with geometry and algebra while Amanda napped, which she considered a fair trade for her babysitting. On Tuesday, February 12th, John's week began with the new routine he'd established. He worked from home, connecting to the office through his new computer setup. Mary managed the office well, rarely needing his input. The business pace had picked up, and all 3 employees stayed busy. Just before noon, John received a call from his lawyer, Bob Taylor, asking him to come in for a 2 p.m. meeting. When John arrived, Bob smiled and said, "I don't know how you did it, but Amy agreed to all your terms. I've never seen a divorce settled so quickly with such serious conditions." Her lawyer will send the signed documents later today. Once you sign, we'll forward your copies." John was shocked but relieved. After signing, he left the office early, telling Mary he would work from home for the rest of the day and possibly the week. Working from home went smoothly on Tuesday, but the next few days were challenging. John tried managing both work and caring for Amanda on his own, but the demands of parenting often interrupted his work. By Friday evening, after putting Amanda to bed, John poured a scotch and realized he needed a better plan. The solution came to him easily. He decided to visit his in-laws over the weekend to discuss his idea. After breakfast on Saturday, he called June, and they arranged a visit at 2 p.m. She also invited them to stay for dinner, which John gladly accepted. When they arrived, Barbara immediately took charge of Amanda, which fit perfectly with John's plan. He joined Fred and June in the living room and shared the recent events, including Amy giving up her parental rights. Both were shocked but understood John's reasoning. John then proposed his idea, having Barbara move in and help care for Amanda after school, allowing him to work at the office in the evenings. He explained that his growing business needed his attention, and Barbara could be compensated for her help. This arrangement would also allow Fred and June the freedom to travel. He emphasized that they should discuss it with Barbara and decide soon. June agreed that it was a promising idea and suggested they discuss it with Barbara after dinner and give John an answer the next day. They all agreed, and the topic wasn't brought up again during the visit. After a pleasant evening, John and Amanda returned home, spending a quiet Saturday night together. On Sunday morning, John received the expected call from June. She told him that Barbara was excited about the idea, and both she and Fred agreed it could work. Since there was some time pressure, Fred offered to come over that afternoon to help set up Barbara's room. When Fred arrived, John showed him the house layout. The master bedroom and bath were on the right at the top of the stairs, with Amy's former studio on the left. Amanda's room and the main bathroom were next, and at the end of the hall was the guest bedroom. John and Fred cleared out the guest room, removing unneeded items to make space for Barbara's things. They decided to put Barbara's computer desk, bookshelf, and study desk in Amy's old studio. Fred offered to buy a rug, blinds, and curtains for Barbara's spaces, since John would be busy with work and Amanda. They also planned to add child-proof gates to the stairs. On Monday, February 18th, John called Mary to let her know she should contact him on his cell for any emergencies. He also instructed her to leave any evening printing jobs for him as long as Frank had other work. The day went smoothly with only 2 brief calls from Mary. At 3 p.m., Fred, June, and Barbara arrived with enough of Barbara's belongings for a 2-week stay. They helped set up her room and settled in. John thanked them, kissed Amanda goodbye, and headed to the office. Once there, he called a meeting with Frank and Mary to explain his new schedule. John outlined that he would arrive around 3 p.m., handle calls and meetings during business hours, and work on files and printing after 5 p.m., aiming to reduce Frank's overtime. Frank and Mary saw no issues with the plan, and they continued their work. John worked through the files, took a break for a sandwich, and completed 2 small printing jobs. By 9 p.m., he finished and decided to head home early to check on Barbara. At home, the house was quiet. He found Barbara working in her study room, surrounded by school books. She was in her pajamas, focused on her homework. John asked how things were going, and Barbara mentioned Amanda had been a bit fussy but otherwise fine. She also asked for help with her math homework, which John gladly provided after freshening up. As they worked together, John noticed Barbara was more comfortable around him, smiling more easily. Though she still blushed when their hands accidentally touched, their relationship had grown stronger. The rest of the week went smoothly. John and Barbara established routines. John prepared breakfast, Barbara packed lunches and fed Amanda, and John took over Amanda's care once Barbara left for school. On 2 evenings, John finished work early and joined Barbara for dinner, appreciating her cooking skills. On another evening, he stayed home longer so Barbara could study for a test, then returned to the office and worked late. Their first weekend under the new arrangement also went well. Barbara watched Amanda while John worked on Saturday afternoon, and John spent Saturday evening with Amanda while Barbara went out with friends. On Sunday, John invited Fred and June over for dinner to discuss the past week. They agreed that everything had gone well and decided to make the arrangement permanent. Barbara's remaining clothes would be brought over during the week, and John would arrange temporary guardianship papers so he could handle any school or emergency situations. 2 bank accounts would be set up, one for Barbara's wages and another for her clothing, incidentals, and allowance, funded by her parents. Fred and June were excited to start traveling in their motorhome and planned to prepare it in the coming week. They also decided to buy a dolly to tow their car and aimed to leave in 2 weeks. The next 2 weeks passed quickly, with John and Barbara refining their routines. One emergency arose when a major client needed to meet with John unexpectedly. He asked his neighbor, Vicky Pierce, a 60-year-old widow, to babysit Amanda. Vicky enjoyed it and offered to help any time, which relieved John's worries. John's business continued steadily, and working evenings allowed him to avoid hiring another employee. Mary had become so capable that she rarely needed to call him at home. The pressure John had been feeling began to lift, and he started to enjoy life again. Since Amy's departure, John's emotional and physical desires had been suppressed. As the 1-month anniversary of her leaving approached, he found solace in memories of his first girlfriend from college. Though he still thought of Amy daily and fell asleep with her image in mind, he began accepting life without her. He also started reducing his nightly scotch habit, fearing it could become a problem. He knew he had too much to live for, especially Amanda. On Sunday, March 10th, June and Fred joined John, Barbara, and Amanda for dinner before their motorhome trip. After the meal, they relaxed in the living room, talking and watching Amanda play. June expressed her frustration that Amy hadn't called since leaving, and Fred added that he was also surprised. John admitted he didn't expect to hear from her, given the terms of their separation. During the conversation, John asked if Barbara had her driver's license, recalling seeing her drive. Fred confirmed she did, but mentioned they were taking their car on the trip. John offered to insure Amy's car for Barbara to use for school and errands, which both Fred and Barbara appreciated. Barbara excitedly agreed, promising to drive carefully. As the evening wound down, Barbara put Amanda to bed and planned to study, while June and Fred prepared for their early departure. They said their goodbyes, promising to call regularly, and left excited for their new adventure. John and Barbara waved them off from the front door. On Wednesday, March 27th, the past 2.5 weeks had flown by for John. He and Barbara had continued refining their responsibilities around the house. With Barbara now using the car, she handled most of the grocery shopping, usually on Saturdays while John cared for Amanda. That morning, Barbara slept in due to her morning classes being canceled for a teacher's meeting. She had asked John to get Amanda up, which was usually her task. After feeding Amanda, she began crying and looking around. John hoped Amanda would eventually stop missing her mother, but she continued to fuss. At that moment, Barbara came downstairs in her pajamas for breakfast, and Amanda immediately stopped crying when she saw her. Noticing this, John remarked, "Looks like she's missing you, not Amy. You better not move back home anytime soon," he joked. "Don't worry, I'm not going anywhere," Barbara replied with a smile as she picked up Amanda and went back upstairs. On Thursday, April 4th, around 10 a.m., John had just finished reading to Amanda, who was now scribbling with a crayon in her high chair. When the doorbell rang, he made sure Amanda was secure before answering. He found Lynn Cameron, a longtime friend of Amy's, at the door. "Hi, Lynn. Long time no see," John greeted her. "Hi, John. I thought I'd stop by for some coffee. Your office said you work from home," Lynn replied. John invited her in, and they sat at the kitchen table with coffee. Lynn, as usual, looked stylish, wearing a tight white sweater that emphasized her curves. "So, Lynn, what's the real reason you're here?" John asked with a knowing smile. "I've been talking to Amy. She knows she can't contact you directly, but she asked me to check in. She's not trying to reopen old wounds. She just wants a few photos of Amanda," Lynn explained. "That's fine," John agreed. "I understand why she'd want photos, though it might upset her." Lynn took a few pictures of Amanda coloring and shared that she'd told Amy she was making a mistake by leaving. She even mentioned that if her ex had been like John, she would never have divorced him. "Thanks for the support," John said, reflecting on how difficult things had been. He explained that the early days were tough, but he'd hired a nanny for Amanda. Lynn was curious about the nanny, but before John could elaborate, her phone rang. She'd forgotten a hair appointment. Apologizing, she quickly took a few more photos, asking John to hold Amanda for some, then hurried out. As she left, she mentioned she'd let Amy know about the nanny and would stop by again for more photos if John was okay with it. On Wednesday, May 1st, Barbara's parents returned from their trip, and John and Barbara invited them over for dinner. They shared stories and photos of their travels, mentioning they met a couple with similar interests, and planned to join them on another trip starting May 15th. Fred and June were excited about the upcoming journey. They were eager to hear how things had gone at home, and John reassured them that everything was going well. His business was busy, but he still had time to spend with Barbara and Amanda. Barbara was doing well in school, and Amanda was adjusting nicely. even taking her first steps and starting to say Dada and Baba. Her grandparents were thrilled. Barbara then shared her own news. Her orthodontist told her the braces could come off in June, and she had decided to pursue a career in graphic design. Her parents encouraged her to keep an open mind until she finished high school, but they were supportive. John mentioned that his business might need a graphic designer in the future, and Barbara joked that she could work for him someday. Later, John informed them that Amy had sent Lynn to take photos of Amanda, which they agreed was likely for the best. They also noted that they still hadn't heard from Amy. The week had been routine until Wednesday, when John received a call from his lawyer, Bob Taylor. The divorce papers were finalized and would be official in 3 weeks. This news hit John hard, and instead of working, he spent the afternoon lying on his bed, thinking about Amy. The pain in his chest returned. Later, Lynn called to arrange another visit to take photos, but John asked her to wait until the following week, as he wasn't ready to deal with anything related to Amy. Monday, May 27th, marked the end of a tough month for John. The divorce was finalized the previous week, and he had received the documents confirming it. After a brief afternoon at work, John confided in Mary, who was concerned enough to call him at home later. That evening, John retreated to his office with a scotch, trying to hide his emotions from Barbara. However, she found him crying and comforted him, reminding him that he still had her and Amanda. The next Monday brought more difficult news. Barbara returned home after stopping at her parents' house and found a message from Amy. She hesitantly told John that Amy had called to say she was marrying Peter Bridges on Saturday and that they were leaving for Paris on Sunday. John's reaction was immediate. He turned pale and tears filled his eyes. He whispered, "Oh God," as Barbara shared the news. He thanked her for being there for Amanda, knowing he wouldn't be good company that night, and decided to head to the office to process his emotions. After he left, Barbara quietly expressed her sympathy for John, wishing she could help him move on from Amy. Then she called her parents to give them the news. On Tuesday, June 11th, John waited for Barbara to return from her final orthodontist appointment, hoping that getting her braces off would help her become more confident and social. When she arrived, he smiled and said, "Let's see that big smile you've been hiding." Barbara flashed a smile, and John encouraged her to show it more often, telling her she was beautiful. Barbara, touched by his compliment, hugged and kissed him on the cheek, and John blushed in response. By Monday, July 1st, John's work had kept him busier, so he hadn't joined Barbara and Amanda for dinner as often. He decided to make the holiday weekend a family time. He spent Saturday doing chores and cooking while encouraging Barbara to go out with her friends that evening. John spent the night playing with Amanda, reading to her, and putting her to bed with lullabies. When Barbara returned at 11:30, they watched Saturday Night Live together, laughing and sharing jokes. On Sunday, they visited the local zoo with a friend of Barbara's, and John enjoyed watching the girls have fun while he pushed Amanda in her stroller. They had dinner at a family restaurant, and the girls helped keep Amanda entertained. On Monday, they enjoyed a picnic at the park, where Barbara brought another friend. While Amanda played, the two girls socialized with other friends. Later, they ate ice cream and enjoyed the fireworks. That night, after Amanda was asleep, Barbara thanked John for the great weekend, hugged him, and headed to bed, leaving John with a smile. A week later, June and Fred returned from their trip and spent many weekends and evenings visiting with John, Barbara, and Amanda. They shared stories and photos, enjoying family time together. John adjusted his work schedule to spend more evenings with Amanda and give Barbara time with her friends. Once a month, Lynn Cameron visited to take photos of Amanda, sending them to Amy in Paris. During one July visit, Lynn hinted at her interest in John, suggesting he could ask her out. John politely declined, saying he wasn't ready, but Lynn made it clear she wanted to be first in line when he was. In early August, John overheard Fred and June discussing what to get Barbara for her birthday on August 17th. Realizing he needed to get her a gift as well, he began thinking about what to buy. On the morning of Barbara's birthday, Saturday, August 17th, John woke up early to prepare a special breakfast. When Barbara came downstairs, she was surprised to see a "Happy Birthday, Barbara" banner, a festive tablecloth, and candles on the table. "Good morning, birthday girl," John greeted her, serving her favorite blueberry pancakes, as her mother had mentioned. Barbara, touched by the effort, thanked him. After breakfast, John gave her a card and a gift certificate for a day at Domenico's beauty spa. Barbara was thrilled and hugged John tightly, though he gently pulled back, feeling a bit uncomfortable. He kissed her forehead and wished her a happy birthday. Later, at her parents' house, Barbara's mother teasingly pointed out that the spa package included a bikini wax, embarrassing Barbara. The conversation soon shifted, and she eventually laughed it off. On Tuesday, September 10th, Barbara started her senior year of high school. With her first class at 11 a.m., she relaxed at home until she heard the doorbell and John greeting someone. Curious, she peeked downstairs and saw a well-dressed woman taking photos of Amanda. The woman flirtatiously touched John's chest, and Barbara overheard her say, "I'll hold you to that next month for sure," followed by laughter. Feeling uneasy, Barbara returned to her room, wondering who the woman was and why she acted that way with John. Later, she asked John about the visitor, and he explained that it was Lynn Cameron, a friend of Amy's, who took monthly photos of Amanda. Still concerned, Barbara left for school, deep in thought. On Wednesday, October 16th, it was a warm fall day, and John was outside with Amanda, who was dressed without a diaper as part of her toilet training. They were playing in the fenced front yard when John heard the sound of a camera shutter and saw Lynn Cameron arrive. "Hello, Lynn. I didn't see you there. How are you?" John greeted her. "I'm good, but I'd be even better if you took me out for dinner this weekend." "How about it?" Lynn replied with a playful smile. John laughed and agreed, suggesting Saturday night. Lynn proposed dinner and dancing, which John accepted, joking that she'd have to pick the dance spot since it had been a while for him. Lynn suggested they could always dance at her place if they couldn't find a spot, then took a few more photos before leaving, reminding John to make reservations. That evening, John had dinner with Barbara and Amanda and asked Barbara if she was free to babysit on Saturday, as he had a date with Lynn. Barbara's smile faded, and she hesitantly agreed, seeming upset. After John left for work, Barbara, feeling emotional, confided in Amanda, worried that John might be serious about Lynn. Determined to compete with Lynn, she decided to use her beauty spa gift certificate and start working out. While Barbara was at home feeling sad, John was at the office, excited about the date and feeling ready to move on from Amy. He made dinner reservations and finished his work with newfound energy. When he got home, he noticed Barbara's light was still on and checked on her. Seeing she'd been crying, he asked if she was okay. Barbara downplayed it, saying she was just having a bad day. John offered to talk if she ever needed to, and mentioned that Mrs. Pierce could babysit if Barbara had plans, but Barbara reassured him she was fine to babysit. Before he left, Barbara asked if she could start using the exercise equipment in the basement. John agreed, reminding her to be careful with Amanda around. The next morning, John noticed Barbara had already started using the equipment, seeing her return from a workout in a t-shirt and shorts. Impressed by her dedication, he commented that she was putting him to shame. Barbara simply replied, "No time like the present," before heading upstairs to shower. On Saturday, October 19th, John felt the day drag as he waited for his evening date with Lynn. He noticed Barbara seemed unusually serious and checked if she was okay with babysitting. She assured him she didn't mind. By 5:30, John was ready, and when he came downstairs, Barbara complimented him, saying he looked very handsome. He handed her a list of his evening's locations and phone numbers. As he left, he mentioned he might be home late, telling her not to wait up. After he left, Barbara held Amanda, fighting back tears. She quietly told Amanda, "I hope your dad doesn't fall in love with her." Amanda's usual babbling brought a small smile to Barbara's face. When John arrived at Lynn's, she greeted him in a stunning black dress. He admired her with a whistle before they headed to the Sheraton for dinner. Seated near the dance floor, they enjoyed drinks and conversation. Lynn expressed surprise that John had asked her out, given his past with Amy. John admitted he wasn't entirely over Amy, but was trying to move on. They had a great meal and shared a dessert, laughing and feeding each other whipped cream. After dinner, they danced, and as they swayed closely, John became aware of how physically close they were. His initial concern about Lynn noticing faded as they continued dancing. However, when a familiar song played, a favorite of his and Amy's, his mood shifted. Sensing it, Lynn teased him, but John explained the song's significance. They took a break from dancing but returned to the floor for more songs throughout the night. After midnight, they decided to leave. Outside, Lynn kissed John passionately, and the two continued kissing in the car. Back at Lynn's apartment, she invited him in for a drink. Once inside, they resumed kissing before Lynn reminded him about the drink. After pouring wine, they toasted to good friends and continued talking. Lynn mentioned she had told Amy about her plans to ask John out, though Amy hadn't responded. John suggested they avoid discussing Amy, as her memory still affected him. Lynn took the hint, set their glasses aside, and led John to her bedroom. Lighting candles, she stood before him and unzipped her dress, letting it fall to the floor. "Well, what do you think?" she asked, turning in a circle. John simply replied, "Amazing." They soon had sex and showered together, enjoying a satisfying end to their evening. Lynn wanted John to stay the night, but he knew he had to get home since he hadn't informed Barbara he might be out late. At 2:30 a.m., he kissed Lynn goodbye at her door. She teased, "We have to do this again sometime." John laughed, agreeing it wouldn't take much convincing. When he got home, he chose not to use the garage, worried it might wake Barbara. However, he noticed her watching from her bedroom window as he walked up to the house. Upstairs, John knocked on Barbara's door and asked if everything was okay since she was still awake. She replied, "Everything is fine," but he sensed something was off and asked if he could come in. When she agreed, he entered and saw she had been crying. Concerned, he asked what was bothering her. Barbara hesitated before asking if he was in love with Lynn and whether Lynn would move in, as she didn't want to leave him and Amanda. Shocked, John reassured her that he wasn't in love with Lynn. They were just friends, and he had no plans to move her in. He added that he wanted Barbara to stay at least until Amanda started school, as Amanda had bonded with her like a mother. Relieved, Barbara smiled and thanked him, admitting she feared being sent home. John gently touched her head and assured her she didn't need to worry about that. He then said goodnight and left, reminding her that they both needed sleep before Amanda woke up. Barbara lay in bed for a while, thinking, before finally falling asleep with a smile. On Wednesday, October 23rd, John was ready to leave for work when Barbara came home from school, smiling. She asked if he had any plans for November 16th, and when he said no, she told him she had made dinner reservations for his birthday and arranged for Mrs. Pierce to babysit Amanda. On Saturday, November 16th, John started his day early, but not as early as Barbara, who had already been working out. She reminded him to be ready by 6 p.m. for their dinner plans. After she went upstairs, John reflected on how well things were going. His business was thriving. He had hired another printer, bought more equipment, and Mary, his office manager, was doing great. She had even suggested hiring a part-time graphic design student, which had worked out well, improving their work quality. John had been out with Lynn again the previous weekend, and they had spent another night together. He noticed Barbara seemed a bit distant for a couple of days afterward, but returned to normal by Tuesday. Meanwhile, Amanda was progressing quickly, using many new words and being proud of her recent toilet training. Her grandparents were impressed with her growth. Barbara went out before 9 a.m., and John spent the day with Amanda, reading her favorite books until she napped. While she slept, he caught up on office work. Later, after taking Amanda for a walk, he noticed Barbara's car was back. Mrs. Pierce arrived at 4:30 to babysit Amanda, and after making sure she had everything she needed, John went upstairs to get ready for his dinner with Barbara. At 5:30, John was downstairs when Barbara appeared. Mrs. Pierce exclaimed, "Oh my gosh, Barbara, just look at you." John turned and immediately understood why. Barbara's ponytail was gone, replaced by a stylish cut with highlights. Her makeup was flawless, and she had clearly had a manicure. She wore a black dress with a knee-length skirt and spaghetti straps, carrying a matching purse. "Barbara, you look amazing," John said. "You've gone from 17 to 21 since this morning." "Thank you, John. I used up your gift certificate. It was time for a change, and this made it possible," Barbara replied, grinning from ear to ear. Mrs. Pierce turned Barbara around for John to see the full transformation, adding, "Barbara, you've really grown from a girl into a woman." Blushing but smiling, Barbara took John's arm and asked, "Well, Mrs. Pierce, do we look like a couple?" "You sure do," Mrs. Pierce responded. "We need a picture." John retrieved his camera, and Mrs. Pierce took several photos of them. Then it was time to leave. John helped Barbara into the car, and as they drove off, he asked, "So, where are we going?" "I reserved a table at the Sheraton dining room. I figured it must be good since you took Lynn there," Barbara replied. "You seem to know Mrs. Pierce pretty well," John remarked. "She comes over sometimes when you're at work. We talk a lot. She's really nice," Barbara explained. At the Sheraton, they were seated quickly. John couldn't get over how much Barbara had matured, not just in appearance, but also in confidence. Shortly after they sat down, the waitress asked for their drink orders and mistakenly assumed Barbara was John's wife. Barbara, grinning, ordered a Coke, and John laughed at the mix-up. Their meal was delicious, and their conversation was more in-depth than usual. They decided to share a dessert, and by the time they finished, the band had started playing. John noticed Barbara watching the dancers, so he asked if she wanted to dance. "I'd love to," Barbara said, mentioning that her dad had taught her to slow dance. They danced 3 songs together before the music sped up. Barbara was a smooth, confident dancer, and John enjoyed their time on the dance floor. They danced 5 more slow songs throughout the night, thoroughly enjoying themselves. Afterward, as they returned to the car, Barbara looked radiant, and John couldn't stop smiling. When they pulled into the garage, Barbara said, "There's one last thing I want to give you for your birthday." She leaned over and kissed him gently on the lips. Though brief, the kiss left John momentarily speechless. Barbara then got out of the car, and John hurried around to help her inside. Back home, they chatted with Mrs. Pierce about their evening while having coffee. After Mrs. Pierce left, John took Barbara's hands and thanked her for a wonderful evening, telling her it was the best birthday he'd had in years. They went upstairs together, and as John stopped at his bedroom door, Barbara waved and said, "Good night." "Good night, Barbara," John replied as she entered her room. Though he went to bed, John stayed awake for another hour, replaying the evening in his mind. On Tuesday, December 31st at 7 p.m., John was waiting for Barbara to get ready for their New Year's Eve outing with her parents. Fred and June had returned home on the 15th, and the group had spent a lot of time together over Christmas. The 4 adults were heading to a New Year's Eve party at the Sheraton Hotel ballroom, with Mrs. Pierce babysitting Amanda. Barbara volunteered to be the designated driver, so John poured himself a small scotch while waiting. As he sipped, he reflected on the past 2 weeks. Fred and June were amazed at how much Barbara had changed during their trip. Her new hairstyle and confidence made her seem like a different person. John had been busy as his business grew, looking forward to a slower pace after the new year. He had given his employees reduced hours between Christmas and New Year's to enjoy some extra time off. Christmas had been a pleasant celebration with Barbara's parents, and there had been plenty of fun moments, like when June and Barbara kept catching John under the mistletoe. Fred and June decided to attend a New Year's Eve party and found 4 tickets, insisting that John and Barbara join them. At 8 o'clock, after Mrs. Pierce arrived to babysit, John and Barbara left to pick up her parents. At the party, they met another couple, Pat and Sylvia, friends of John's. The 3 couples spent the evening dancing, chatting, and having a good time. Barbara especially enjoyed being part of the adult group, dancing with John, her father, or Pat throughout the night. As midnight approached, Barbara made sure John was on the dance floor with her. While they danced and the countdown began, she whispered, "This has been the best year of my life." John replied, "This year started miserably for me, but it's ending much better. I've loved having you in my home. Amanda adores you like a mother." Barbara responded warmly, "That's so sweet, John. I couldn't love her more if she were my own." They continued dancing until the countdown ended, and when the New Year was celebrated with cheers, John gave Barbara a quick kiss and said, "Happy New Year, Barbara." "Happy New Year," she replied. Fred and June joined them with their New Year's wishes, and soon after, Fred took Barbara for another dance. As they danced, Fred gently said, "Your mother and I noticed you seem fond of John. Just remember, he's been through a lot with your sister. Be careful with his feelings, and don't rush things. You're still young." Barbara reassured him, "I'd never hurt John, Daddy. I really do like him. But I'll wait until I'm 18 before saying anything. I promise." They left shortly after, with Barbara driving. Later that night, in her room, Barbara reflected on her father's advice. She knew he was right, but it didn't make waiting any easier, and it took her a long time to fall asleep. On Saturday, March 15th, a warm, sunny day, Barbara went grocery shopping while Mrs. Pierce visited John and Amanda. Mrs. Pierce offered to take Amanda for a walk, and John helped get Amanda ready, knowing Mrs. Pierce would end up carrying her after a short distance. As John finished his coffee, he decided to check if they were on their way back. Stepping outside, he saw Lynn Cameron had met them and was taking pictures. Lynn called to him, "I can't stay. I have a house showing nearby. I saw Amanda and thought I'd grab some photos for Amy. I'll call you later in the week." Her last shot was of Amanda and Mrs. Pierce standing hand in hand on the sidewalk, with John watching from the doorway. As Lynn drove off, they all waved goodbye. On Saturday, May 17th, John prepared for a date with Lynn at a bar they had discovered a few months ago. They enjoyed the place for its good dance music and lively atmosphere. Barbara was also going out on a date, and Mrs. Pierce was set to babysit. John had noticed Barbara's dating had increased since the new year, though it seemed she was seeing different guys each weekend. He felt relieved she wasn't seeing anyone seriously, as he had felt a bit jealous when she first started dating that year. John had started seeing Barbara as a young woman after their New Year's party and dinner at the Sheraton with her parents. He even wondered if she might have a crush on him, although she was too young for him. Her attention had boosted his self-esteem after Amy left. However, recently Barbara had been a bit distant, and John hoped she wasn't losing interest in her job as Amanda's nanny. As John left for his date, he met Barbara's date at the door, an average-looking teenage boy who seemed flustered when John asked him not to keep Barbara out too late. John picked up Lynn, and they spent a pleasant evening dancing and talking before heading back to Lynn's apartment for coffee. While waiting for the coffee to brew, John kissed Lynn, and soon they moved to the living room, where they ended up making love. Afterward, Lynn revealed that she had met someone new, Mark Arnold, and wanted to pursue a serious relationship with him. John agreed that their connection was more physical than emotional, and they both acknowledged that it was time to move on. The next morning, Sunday, May 18th, John was having coffee when Barbara, fresh from a workout, joined him at the table. She asked about his date, and John shared that Lynn had met someone else, so they wouldn't be seeing each other anymore. Barbara seemed relieved that Lynn hadn't hurt John like Amy had. After finishing her juice, Barbara headed upstairs, clearly pleased, while John remained at the table watching her go. On Saturday, June 21st, Barbara graduated from high school, and her parents, John and Amanda, attended the ceremony. Barbara was thrilled to receive an unexpected award for being the third best student in her class. She credited John for helping her succeed in math and made sure to get pictures with him and Amanda. As they posed for photos, John began to see Barbara as more than just a schoolgirl. She was now a woman, and he wondered if she would continue living in his house while attending university. As he reflected on his life, John realized how much things had changed since his divorce from Amy. He hoped that Barbara would still be part of his future and not just a memory he would mourn over a late-night drink. On Sunday, August 17th, Barbara celebrated her 18th birthday while traveling in Minnesota with her parents, leaving John and Amanda behind. Before leaving, Barbara was concerned about Amanda's care, but John arranged for Mrs. Pierce to babysit. After just 2 days, John and Amanda already missed Barbara, with Amanda especially fussy and insistent that only Barbara could care for her. However, she eventually settled with Mrs. Pierce's help, allowing John to focus on his growing business, which had recently secured a major contract, keeping his staff busy and increasing his own workload. John had gifted Barbara a laptop before she left for university, along with a bouquet of roses, which she appreciated. As the week went on, John missed their morning workout sessions together, though he continued them, noticing positive changes in his physique. On Thursday, John invited Lynn over for coffee, and she took some photos of Amanda before they chatted on the patio. Lynn shared how well her relationship with Mark was going, though his insecurity about her past with John was a concern. They agreed John would send monthly photos of Amanda until Mark felt more comfortable. They also discussed Lynn hearing less from Amy, who hinted at being deceived by Peter, though she offered no details. John felt that Amy's hold on him was fading, with his focus now on Amanda and his business. On October 8th, Barbara returned home from university to find John waiting to catch up over coffee. She excitedly showed him an online discovery, a Parisian newspaper featuring a photo of Amy with her husband and assistant standing beside a painting titled Amanda and Her Nanny. The painting depicted Amanda with Mrs. Pierce, and a shadowy figure in the background that appeared to be John. Another figure, a woman in black, faced away from the viewer. Barbara was puzzled by the painting, but John believed the woman in black represented Amy and speculated that the painting conveyed sadness or regret. They concluded that Amy likely used a photograph, replacing Barbara with Mrs. Pierce as the nanny. John printed copies of the painting, planning to give one to Mrs. Pierce, and then enjoyed a coffee with Barbara. They discussed her university experience, and Barbara admitted that while she had been overwhelmed initially, she was now more comfortable and looking forward to more engaging classes in the next semester. John encouraged her, confident that she would do well. On Saturday, November 15th, Barbara asked John not to make any plans for his birthday evening because she had arranged to take him out. She made dinner reservations at the Sheraton where they had celebrated his last birthday, and John eagerly anticipated the evening. At 5 p.m., Mrs. Pierce arrived to babysit Amanda, and John got ready in his new suit, feeling pleased with how fit he looked after losing nearly 20 pounds. When he went downstairs, he was struck by how beautiful Barbara looked in her green satin dress, and complimented her, admiring her new hairstyle. As they left for dinner, Barbara took John's hand and they walked to the car, feeling natural together. On the drive, they talked about her university classes. At the Sheraton, they enjoyed a leisurely meal in a private alcove. John noticed other men admiring Barbara and asked if she had noticed, to which she laughed, saying women always do. After dinner, they danced closely to slow songs, with Barbara pressing close to John in a way that was new for them. As they danced, John struggled to hide his arousal, but they continued enjoying the music. By midnight, they decided to head home, walking hand in hand. On the drive, Barbara undid her seatbelt and snuggled up to John, just as her parents used to do. When they arrived home, Barbara kissed John passionately, different from the brief kisses of the past. Inside, John thanked her for the wonderful evening, but she hinted that the night wasn't over. Leading him upstairs to his room, she made it clear that she wanted to take their relationship further. John hesitated, concerned about their age difference and her parents' reaction, but Barbara reassured him that she was old enough to make her own decisions. They confessed their feelings for each other, with Barbara expressing her love and John admitting that he had been falling for her for some time. They made love tenderly, and the next morning they woke up together, shared a shower, and prepared breakfast before Amanda joined them. On Saturday, April 24th, John enjoyed a spring afternoon watching hockey, after spending the morning catching up on bookkeeping at the office. His days were usually busy with managing payroll and accounting for his 7 employees. He typically worked evenings so he could watch his daughter Amanda during the day, while Barbara took care of her in the evenings, sometimes with help from Vicky Pierce. It was hard to believe it had been nearly 2 years since his divorce from Amy, and much had changed in that time. As John was watching the game, the doorbell rang. Expecting a salesman, he was surprised to see Lynn. She explained that she was engaged and had been away on a cruise, which is why she hadn't returned his calls. But her visit wasn't about her engagement. It was about Amy, who was back in town and wanted to see him and Amanda. After thinking it over, John agreed to see her. Lynn brought Amy inside, and John noticed how much she had changed. She was slimmer, with shorter hair. After some small talk, Amy began explaining that leaving John was the biggest mistake of her life. She had discovered that Peter, the man she left John for, had lied to her. He was already married twice before, and his behavior mirrored his past, which deeply hurt Amy. As Amy was sharing her regrets, the door opened, and Amanda, excited about getting ice cream, ran into the room. John introduced Amanda to Amy, who was now crying, and they shared a brief hug. But just then, Barbara entered the room, and Amy was shocked to see her younger sister there, now grown up and without braces. Barbara explained she had been living with John and Amanda as Amanda's nanny, while their parents were traveling. The situation took another surprising turn when John revealed that Barbara had legally adopted Amanda, and that he and Barbara had married during a trip to Las Vegas. Stunned, Amy left the house in shock, with Lynn following to comfort her. After Lynn helped Amy to the car, she returned to the house, concerned about Amy's state. John assured Lynn that they would help Amy get back on her feet. As Amy left, visibly upset, John and Barbara stood together, with Amanda asking why her first mommy was crying. Barbara gently explained that Amy was very sad.